Got my good side? Yeah. Super. Okay. Hello there, folks. My name is Mark. I am the lead gardener for the Vanier Gardens here. And today we are going to be talking about edible, medicinal and poisonous plants. We are just going to be introducing 6 that I've chosen personally to kind of give an introduction into this. And before I get any further, I just like to make a quick land acknowledgement. This is the unceded territory of the Ganikahagan people of Turtle Island and other First Nations. It's always important to just remember that this land was somebody else's before we came here. Now, before we get into our 6 plants, I would also like to put a big caveat here. This is not enough for you to go out and identify the plants by yourselves. This video is an introduction. You want to get yourself maybe a guidebook or maybe ask your teacher to get some live specimens. We have many of these plants that I'm going to talk about here that you could like bring into class and look. And especially when dealing with little kids, what I found is a really nice activity to do before you even set foot in the garden is get one of the leaves and have them draw it. Or you can get a print or a copy or a sketch and really have them focus on the details of each plant so that they really know what the plant looks like before they've even stepped foot in a garden. Okay, so yeah, knowing your plants well, using more resources than just this video. This is a quick introduction, and proceeding with caution is especially good with the little ones. Now, saying that, a plant that's poisonous is generally going to be really bitter or acidic and isn't going to be fun to eat, and so we have very little risk a lot of the time, but it's still a risk nonetheless. So we just really want to be careful with that. Now, moving on, the 6 plants that we have today, we're going to be talking about plantain, dandelion, wild grape, and then for our poisonous plants, we're going to be talking about stinging nettle, Virginia creeper, and Bainberry, all of which are growing on our campus here. Now, the very first one is plantain. Some of you may be thinking of the banana tropical fruit, banana-like tropical fruit. It's not, unfortunately. This is Plantago major, or en français, c'est plantain. And we have it growing right here in our gardens. And I'm going to grab a leaf and a flowering stem here, and I'm going to explain to you how to identify this. So, plantain here. It has, we'll do close-ups later on. It has an egg-shaped leaf.
Sorry, give me a second.
You want some plantain for your bug bite? That'll be a nice segue. You just got bit. It's perfect timing. Okay, so plantain. How to identify it? There's kind of 3 main ways to identify this plant. It has an egg-shaped leaf, number 1. Number 2, on the back side, there are these veins here growing up the leaf. Generally, there's between 3 to 7 veins per leaf. If there's just one, it isn't plantain. We're looking at multiple ones here. And then with the stem, you're going to pull away a bit of the stem. There are these stringy, tendon-like cords that exist that are indeed the veins. That is also another way to identify plantain. This here is a flowering stem of plantain. It doesn't have pretty flowers, and indeed the seeds here are almost ready. This is a well pollinated one already. Now, why am I starting with plantain? This is like the very first plant I teach little kids to recognize. Number 1, it's edible, so no harm in taking too much. Doesn't taste very good. You kind of need to boil it and then fry it or kind of treat it like a seaweed. But just to chew it, not a problem. Now, I start with this. It's edible, so it's kind of non-harmful in this regards. Number 2, medicinally, this is a very well-known plant. If you fall over and scrape your knee, plantain will be nearby. It grows, it loves growing in compact soil around footpaths, so wherever there's a lot of people walking, you're going to find plantain growing nearby. Now, how to use plantain? You can't just like tear the leaf and put it on a scrape. It ain't going to work. You need to break up the cell. The easiest way to do this is what's called a spit poultice. Essentially, chew your plant material spit it out, and then right here you have yourself nature's Band-Aid. Plantain is particularly good at helping wounds that have been freshly cut to A, reduce the pain, B, help the healing. It's a very nice anti-inflammatory herb. Just spit it out, put it in the wound. You'll wash it out later when you have the chance, but as a first aid herb, it works really well. Now, the second and probably the one thing I use plantain for the most is this spit poultice also works amazingly well for mosquito bites, bee stings, and snake bites. I can't talk about snake bites. I haven't been bitten by a venomous snake, but I have stepped on bees and I've certainly been bitten by a lot of mosquitoes. Chewing it up, putting it on the mosquito bite, it stops the itching almost within about 10 to 15 seconds. It'll eventually dry up and fall off, and then you can just find another plantain leaf and reapply it. But this plant has really kept me sane during Canadian woodland summers where there's just a lot of mosquitoes. This is like my go-to for instant relief. Some other uses, as a tea herb, it can help with digestion, and I would say that's about it for plantain. But generally, as a first aid herb, kids are always falling over, getting stung by bees or scraping their knees, and chewing up a bit of plantain leaf and putting it on that wound there is going to really help calm it down and make your kids a lot happier at the same time. Okay, plant number 2 is the dandelion, or en français c'est pissenlit, Dandelion aussi. And dandelion is a very generous herb. You never have to go far to find it. The entire plant is edible. It has very mild effects medicinally. It's known as a kidney and liver tonic as well as a digestive tonic. Essentially, adding a bit of dandelion to your diet can help these organs function a little bit better. Now, edible doesn't always mean tasty, right? If anyone has ever eaten a dandelion leaf, and let's just talk about how to identify dandelion leaves. It's called the tooth of the lion because these kind of very deep lobes here remind people of lion's teeth. This is one way to recognize it. There are some lookalikes to dandelion. Now, one thing to keep in mind is dandelion only ever has one flower per stem. There are some other lookalikes out there that have multiple stems coming off. This is something called hawkweed. Similar, it's not poisonous, so I'm not too concerned about, going off and finding a poisonous lookalike of this plant. But saying that, you want to make sure you get the right one. So one stem, it never grows taller than really a foot and a half. And edible leaf. At this time of year, it's a little bitter. I like to sprinkle it in salads. Never like a whole salad of dandelion leaf is going to be way too much. You can sneak it in as you would do any kind of bitter green, like imagine your Asian greens or something like broccoli. You can put dandelion in its place quite easily. The tastiest part is the flower. Now, the stem and the green, what's known as the sepals around here, are quite bitter. So what you want to do is, and I'm wondering, can you see this clearly? Like, do you want to get in a bit closer? So, I've got my flower here. Now the petals are really delicious, but the green part's bitter. So basically what I'm going to do, just pinch with my thumb here and pull off the green part here. Take that off. And then I'm left with mostly the petals here. These are really fun. A little example to do with kids, to just kind of sprinkle it on your pancakes or put it in a cake or even use it to make tea. And if you just chew on the flowers, yeah, it's quite tasty. A little sweet, which is quite tasty. Finally, this is a great fun activity. Spreading your dandelion seeds around, passing them around and just kind of watching them. You could have dandelion races or something like this with the dandelion fluff here. And it is an edible seed as well. You can treat it just like you would any other seed, put it in your porridge or put it in your bread. And that's how you use dandelion. The root, I'm not going to really talk about the root today. It's in there, it's edible. You can roast it and drink it like coffee. You can treat it as any other root veg. Imagine it like a wild carrot relative. But for today's purpose, harvesting roots is like a whole other affair, so we're not going to do it. But leaf and flower, very easy places to start. So this is edible plant number 3. We have right here, we have a lot of this on campus. This is wild grape. And essentially, how to recognize wild grape. It has a palmate leaf. Palmate means there's 5 points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just like your maple. And here, this is all one entire leaf. So this is a simple leaf. That's the botanical term we use, a simple leaf, when it's one entire leaf. It vines. It's also going to have these little tendrils growing on it here. We can see them, I know in Ganyegahagen cultures, they call these snake tongues. They kind of look like they resemble that. And what we're interested in, first of all, this is an edible leaf. This is used in fermentations, and it can also be steamed to use to make those stuffed rolls there. You have meat and rice inside of them, very tasty things. And indeed, we have people coming here, little old ladies coming to collect these leaves on campus. But the thing I'm most interested in are the grapes themselves. Now, wild grape, it has a much bigger seed, and it's generally sour compared to your commercial grapes. These seeds are still a bit young, but they're getting there. Now, you can eat these once you are comfortable with identifying it. I don't crunch on the seed. I just kind of suck the juice off and the skin and spit out the 2 seeds. Now, this can be turned into juice. Put it in a pot and just boil it for 10 minutes or so. Squeeze it out, you've got yourself grape juice. If you add a few fresh grapes to that, it'll ferment into wine. And then the last thing that you can do with grapes here, it's a really fun one to make dyes from. So you can use this to make some nice color, watercolor style things, using this as a natural dye. And any other uses of wild grape, it's a good vitamin C plant. You can find this growing in forests, near riverbanks as well. And aside from that, yeah, that's wild grape, number 3. Okay, let's go. Okay, this is plant number 4, Virginia creeper. C'est quelque chose, you know, in French, it's something Virginie. I'm not really sure. Virginie grimpant, peut-être. I'm not 100% certain. Forgive me on that one. Now, Virginia creeper, this is a mildly poisonous plant, and the reason we're talking about it is it's a very close relative to wild grape. Indeed, it grows exactly the same places as wild grape, and the berries that it makes look like wild grape. Now, how do we recognize the difference between Virginia creeper and wild grape? It's quite simple. Virginia creeper here has a leaf in 5 parts. It's what's called a palmate leaf. These are actually 5 leaflets here. It's a palmate leaf because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just like fingers on a hand here. And this is what's known as a composite leaf. Each of the leaflets are divided. And this is different to grape, which has a simple leaf. Now, the other thing we can do to recognize this is here. These are the berries of Virginia creeper, and they do not grow in bunches. You can see they're quite spaced apart, and unlike the wild grape, which will make like a nice bunch of berries, these ones here are very spaced apart. And let's have a look here. Indeed, the flesh and the color looks a lot like grape as well. If you eat one of these, it's not too toxic. It's going to give you a irritated throat, itchy throat, is my experience of tasting this by accident. And nothing really to call hospital about, but certainly something you don't want to ingest too much about. The birds and the bees and all the other animals do enjoy eating this though, so it certainly has a role to play in our ecosystem. And it makes this beautiful red color in the fall that you'll be very easily able to spot growing around. So it's quite a nice, beautiful plant to have growing on buildings and such places around here. Okay, so that is Virginia creeper, plant number 4. So this is plant number 5, one of my personal favorites as our poisonous plants here. This is stinging nettle, otherwise known as l'ortie, or l'ortie piquante en français, and stinging nettle here. As the name suggests, it stings. There's little tiny trichomes, which are basically hypodermic needles that exist on the leaf and the stem of this plant that when they gently brush against your skin like this, they will sting and inject, I think it's like 40 different plant chemicals, a bunch of acids, but there's also serotonin in there, which is kind of interesting. Now, stinging nettle, the reason it stings is because if it didn't sting, every animal would eat it. It's a very nutritious plant. A quick boil in water will break all of the needles that are on the stem here, and no longer shall it sting. It's a very tasty plant. Make sure you harvest it before it flowers if you want to eat it. And it's basically like as nutritious as spinach. And it's a very good one. Now, if you ever do get stung by stinging nettle, and it's not an enjoyable experience, in Europe it's a lot more common. There's fields of this stuff. And we all learn that basically plantain, plant number 1, if you sting yourself with stinging nettle, chewing it up, putting it over the sting is really going to help reduce the pain. Sometimes the sting can remains painful sometimes for a few hours, and you can still feel it up to a day or two later as kind of pins and needles. It's like not painful, but you can definitely feel that there's something still there. Now, medicinally, this is known as an energy-giving herb. It's a very rich herb in iron, iron being responsible for hemoglobin, hemoglobin being responsible for bringing all the good stuff around your body. So high amounts of iron, high amounts of hemoglobin, get more energy over a longer period of time. Spring is a really good time to harvest it, as well as the fall. And we can see here that it's starting to flower. And once these turn into seeds, seeds are edible. But just keep in mind that you really want to kind of let it dry first, because it may sting. You may get a sting every now and then if you just try and eat the seeds straight off the plant. Other uses of stinging nettle, you can use the stem to turn it into fabric. I've been told that it can be made as soft as silk. And another thing we use this for in the gardens is chopping this plant up, putting it in a barrel of water and letting it rot. And it basically makes a very nutritious tea that we can then feed our fruit and nut trees. Very rich in nitrogen and a bunch of other minerals. And it's basically growing our own fertilizer using this plant. Okay, so here we are with our last poisonous plant, plant number 6. This is Bainberry, or doll's eyes, is its other colloquial name. In French, it's known as lactia blanc. Now, this one you can find in gardens quite easily. It gets its colloquial name doll's eyes because it makes these white berries here that have a little black dot in them, which resemble doll's eyes here. That's can you see that right there? Super. Now, no one in their right mind would eat these. The most commonly poisonous berries are white ones. Red ones are more edible. White ones are more poisonous, more often than not. This is an extremely bitter berry, and eating a handful of these is going to cause nausea, vomiting, and painful cramps. It's not something you want to do. Eat enough of them and it'll kill you. But then again, you eat enough of most plants and they'll kill you as well. Like, it's possible to OD on cabbage, for example. Now, this grows in shadier areas. We're right under trees here. And it's commonly found around Montreal, just as an ornamental. And I think that's all I have to say about Bainberry. I don't know of any positive uses of this plant. It's just one of these plants that exists, and it's not one that we want to spend a lot of time interacting with. So there you have our 6 plants. I hope you enjoyed this short little video. Again, I'd like to reiterate that this isn't everything you need to go out and comfortably identify them. Perhaps you could ask us for a map, or ask your teacher for live plant specimens so you can really see these for yourselves. Or contact us and I'll happily give you a tour as well. Now, some things, a final note, like what happens if the worst comes to worst and somebody does ingest a poisonous plant, or they start showing symptoms. Like, some symptoms can be burning around the lips and in the mouth, very bitter flavor, nausea, vomiting, fever. Now, if these things start to happen, first thing you want to do is call the emergency services. It's always better to be safe than sorry. There are a handful of plants out there which are very, very dangerous. Only a few, but still enough. Do not try and force vomiting, like sticking fingers down throats, especially for little ones. It doesn't work. Forced vomiting, purging only empties about 1/3 of your stomach anyways, so there's still going to be plant material left in there. In terms of first aid, what you can do is activated charcoal, get the powder form, and it's like 2 or 3 tablespoons of that mixed in with some water and drunk down. It helps absorb the toxins when they start being digested by your body, and that's what a lot of hospitals give people when they first arrive as well. Hospitals are not plant experts. There's a poison helpline you can call as well. They have one plant expert who's not always there. So essentially bring with you the suspected poisonous plant to the hospital. It's going to make their lives a lot easier. Once you can identify the plant, you can really start to find the right antidotes and remedies for that. Aside from that, don't panic too much. A lot of the time it's going to be a stomach cramp, and that's about it. I don't think there's anything more to say about that. So thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bon, c'est fini.